Sure, hand over the pool keys. That was the first thing out of his mouth. Not a question, an order. Karen stood a few feet behind him, arms crossed, smirking like she'd just called in an airstrike. I looked at the badge, then back at her. I said, "You really sent your husband for this?" She didn't blink. "You've ignored 3 notices," she said. "The pool belongs to the community." He tightened his jaw, proud to be her muscle. I kept my tone flat. "It's on my property," he said. "Not according to her." Karen stepped closer, voice sharp. "Don't play dumb. You either cooperate or we'll escalate." I could feel the heat rising off both of them, one flexing authority, the other feeding on it. But underneath my silence, I was smiling. Because while she thought this was about pool keys, it wasn't. It was about power, and she had just walked into my investigation without realizing it. So when he said again, "Keys," now I stepped closer and told him, calm and steady, "You might want to check who you're threatening, officer." They didn't know it yet, but I was already investigating them. "By the way, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now?" When the patrol car finally rolled away, I stood there for a second, staring at the reflection of the lights fading off the water. My hands were steady, my heart wasn't. It's not every day your neighbor sends her husband in uniform to steal your pool keys. The truth? This wasn't just about a pool. It never is with people like her. It's about control. About making sure everyone knows who runs the neighborhood. My name's Cole. I moved back here last spring after my dad passed. The house had been in our family since the 70s, built by his own hands, stone pool, cedar porch, everything carved out of sweat and stubborn pride. I came back to restore it, not to fight over it. The HOA showed up 6 weeks later. New board, new rules, same script, and leading it, Karen Langford, retired realtor, self-appointed queen of property values. She spoke like every sentence should be printed on a brochure. Always smiling, always watching. The first notice came 2 days after our welcome meeting. Unapproved structure detected. Pool requires inspection. My dad's pool, the one she called a liability. I ignored it. Then came the fines. Then the letters. Then tonight. She thought she'd scare me by sending her badge-wearing husband. She had no idea that intimidation is just another kind of paperwork, and I've spent my whole life dealing with worse. What she doesn't know yet is that this fight isn't staying on her turf. It's about to move to mine. I grew up on this property long before there were fences, forms, or rules. Back then it was just me, my dad, and a patch of wild land that smelled like pine and gasoline. The pool wasn't built by contractors, it was carved out by hand. Pops mixed concrete in a wheelbarrow, laid stone by stone, and told me, "Never let anyone claim what you've built." I didn't understand it then. Now it's the line I live by. Every summer had the same rhythm, the chirp of cicadas, the thump of his hammer, the hiss of water filling the basin. Pops didn't believe in shortcuts. If you build it right, he'd say, you only have to build it once. He treated that pool like proof that work and freedom were the same thing. When he died, I promised I'd keep both alive. So when I moved back, I cleaned the leaves out, fixed the filter, patched the cracks. For a few months, it felt like he was still here. Then Karen showed up. It started with a friendly knock. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, voice bright, eyes sharp. She wore a blazer even in July, and handed me a glossy pamphlet titled Community Harmony Guidelines. I skimmed it and smiled politely. She smiled wider, like she'd just handed me a leash. A week later, she cornered me at the HOA meeting. The room smelled like coffee and control. She flipped through her binder and said, loud enough for everyone, "Mr. Cole, you have an unregistered water structure on your property." Laughter from the back row. "It's a pool," I said. "Unregistered," she repeated, savoring the word. "It's been here since..." "Then it's definitely non-compliant." That's when I realized Karen didn't care about safety or paperwork. She cared about power, and she wasn't doing it alone. Her husband, Officer Langford, was never far behind. You'd see his cruiser on random nights parked just close enough to my driveway for the headlights to hit my mailbox. No ticket, no reason, just presence. The kind that says, "We're watching." The first night it happened, I stood on the porch with a beer and watched the clock tick past midnight. The car didn't move. I didn't either. He wanted me to feel cornered. I wanted him to know I didn't scare. After that, I started keeping records. Dates, photos, copies of every letter. My dad taught me construction. The bureau taught me documentation. You learn fast that truth only matters when it's written down. The next few weeks felt like a slow invasion. Every time I stepped outside, there was something new. A bright yellow notice tacked to the gate, a drone hovering overhead, a neighbor pretending to walk their dog while taking pictures. Karen called it community vigilance. I called it stalking. One morning I caught her standing near the fence, holding a clipboard like a badge. She didn't even flinch when I said, "You know that's trespassing, right?" She smiled. "Just verifying compliance. We can't have unauthorized pools drawing water from the community supply." I almost laughed. The pool fed from the same spring my dad tapped 40 years ago, a natural source that ran straight through the hill. No community line, no shared meter, just groundwater and gravity. That's when I started digging into the bylaws. Page after page of HOA jargon, noise limits, fence colors, lawn heights, but not a single clause giving them control over natural water. Then I pulled the county plat maps and old deed records. The spring wasn't even within the HOA boundary. An HOA can't claim jurisdiction over natural springs or private pools outside a recorded easement. Doesn't stop them from trying. The following weekend, she escalated. A letter arrived marked urgent. Inside an invoice, $2,500 fine for illegal community water use. No hearing, no warning, just debt by declaration. I walked to her house that afternoon. She was trimming roses in her front yard, visor tilted, smile fixed. "Is this a joke?" I asked, waving the paper. "Rules are rules," she said. "You'll find the payment details on the back. I don't owe you a dime." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You think you're different because that pool was your daddy's? Around here, we do things by the book." "Whose book?" I said. "Mine," she answered without hesitation. I remember the sound of her shears snapping closed, sharp, final, like a warning shot. That night, I sat by the pool with a flashlight, flipping through folders of property records, county permits, and photos of my dad's old blueprints. The air smelled like chlorine and pine, exactly how it did when he used to sit out here after a long day's work. I could almost hear him saying, "Don't let anyone claim what you've built." For the first time I understood what he meant. It wasn't about fences or water. It was about standing your ground when someone tried to rewrite the truth. Karen thought she'd won. She thought a fine and a threat would make me bow. But intimidation's just another kind of invitation, and she just invited me to fight back. So I gathered every document, every photo, every letter she'd ever sent. I built a folder the way my dad built that pool, one layer at a time, solid and permanent. Then I wrote her a reply, one line printed in bold across the top. "You want paperwork? You'll get paperwork." I sealed it, dropped it in her HOA mailbox, and walked home under the same moonlight that glinted off her husband's cruiser. The difference was, this time I wasn't angry. I was focused. Because the next round wouldn't be about neighborhood rules. It would be about law, and I play by federal standards. It started small, like most invasions do. One morning I noticed a faint hum above the water. I looked up and there it was, a drone, hovering like a mechanical mosquito, camera tilted straight at me. I waved. It didn't leave. The next day there were two. A week later, one of the HOA volunteers just happened to be walking by with a telephoto lens. When I asked what he was doing, he said, "Documenting potential violations." I told him to get off my property. He smiled like it was a game. Soon after that came the noise complaints. Anonymous, of course, excessive splashing after dark, unapproved gatherings. One even claimed I was operating a commercial facility. All lies. I don't even play music out here. Still, every complaint triggered another letter, and every letter was hand-delivered by the same man, Officer Langford, Karen's husband. He'd pull up in his cruiser, lights off, engine idling, and slide the envelope through the gate. Never a word. Just that steady stare of someone who enjoys the uniform a little too much. Sometimes I'd hear Karen's golf cart whirring in the background, waiting at the corner to see how I reacted. She didn't need to say anything. Her silence said, "I own this neighborhood." I tried to talk it out once. She was at the mailbox, pretending not to see me. I said, "Karen, can we just be reasonable?" She looked up from her phone and said, "Talk to the board." Then she walked away, leaving the smell of her perfume and the sting of every fake smile she'd ever given. That's when I knew this wasn't random. It was a campaign designed to wear me down inch by inch until I'd give up and move. It worked on other homeowners. One neighbor sold last month after being fined for leaving a hose on his lawn. Another was written up for having too many guests. Karen didn't enforce rules. She enforced fear. I stopped reacting. Instead, I watched. When the drone showed up, I filmed it. When her husband delivered a letter, I logged the time and date. I started stacking facts the way she stacked lies. Quietly. Patiently. Then one night I stayed up late reading the HOA financial reports. They're public, but no one ever bothers to check. That's when I found it, the pool maintenance fund. Thousands of dollars marked operational costs, but no contractor names, no receipts, no city permits, just a signature at the bottom. Officer Langford. That's when something shifted in me. This wasn't just about control anymore. It was about corruption. I closed the file, leaned back in my chair, and said out loud, "You messed with the wrong man." Outside, the pool lights flickered on their timer, rippling over the stone Pops laid 50 years ago. He built this place to last. And now, so would I. Once you start looking for corruption, you can't unsee it. The cracks show up everywhere. A neighbor mentioned she couldn't get into the community pool because her access card was disabled. Another said she was told to buy a new pass directly from Karen for cash. When I asked around quietly, every story matched. No receipts, no records, just folded bills and a wink. I went back to the ledger. The line item for guest amenities had jumped from $2,000 to nearly $15,000 in less than a quarter. No explanation, no paper trail, but the HOA meeting minutes showed pool access fees collected and processed by Chairwoman Langford. That was Karen. She was skimming, and her husband was signing off. That's when I realized every envelope he delivered wasn't just intimidation, it was protection. He was her enforcer, dressed in government-issued authority. That's not just unethical, it's illegal. Knowledge nugget din 2, using police resources for private enforcement violates state ethics laws. It's one of those rules people forget until it cost them their badge. I decided to start gathering real proof. Not gossip, not hearsay, evidence. I bought a small audio recorder, one of those pen-size models that fit in a shirt pocket. I clipped it on every time I left the house. When Langford came by, I'd answer the door calm and polite, let him say whatever he needed to say, and then close it without argument. Every tone, every word. I added cameras too, motion sensors along the fence line, one inside the mailbox, one angled toward the pool gate. Nothing fancy, just clear enough to catch faces. I wasn't looking for drama. I was building a record. Then something strange happened. The visit stopped. For a few days, no letters, no drones, no surveillance, just quiet. That kind of silence isn't peace, it's planning. The next HOA meeting was packed. Karen stood at the front like a politician, flipping through her binder. "We have received multiple reports of non-compliance," she said, staring right at me. "It's important to remember that our officers can enforce community rules at any time." That word "officers" hung heavy in the air. I saw Langford in the back, arms folded, still in uniform even though the badge meant nothing in that room. It was a show of force. Everyone saw it. Most stayed silent. A few shifted in their seat. When the meeting ended, I walked past her and said quietly, "You're not as subtle as you think." She smiled, that same real estate smile, and said, "You should really consider selling. These things have a way of getting exhausting." I walked out before I said something I couldn't take back. On the way home, I thought about my dad and that old line, "Never let anyone claim what you've built." That's when I knew I wasn't leaving. They wanted a fight. Fine. But I wouldn't be swinging in the dark anymore. The days after that meeting felt heavier. It wasn't just the heat or the tension, it was the sense that I was being watched even when I wasn't. The mail started coming half opened. Trash cans were tipped over in the night. Once I found a bright orange violation notice taped to my truck windshield that said "Unauthorized Commercial Vehicle." It was my work truck. My name was painted right on the door. I stopped reacting. That's what she wanted, for me to explode, to lose credibility. Instead, I kept documenting. Every notice went into a folder. Every incident had a timestamp. I even logged the drone flights. The pattern was clear. Anything I fixed or improved, they found a new way to weaponize. Karen called it compliance management. I called it harassment. But the worst part wasn't what she did, it was how everyone else acted like it was normal. You could see the fear in the neighbors' eyes. Nobody wanted to cross her. She'd fine one person for weeds and let another slide for months, just to prove who she liked. The HOA had turned into her personal kingdom, and her husband was the sword. One night around midnight, I saw the cruiser again, parked in the same spot by my driveway, headlights dimmed, engine running low. I walked out with my phone recording and stood at the gate. He didn't move, didn't roll the window down, just sat there. 10 minutes. 15. Then he pulled away slow, tires crunching the gravel like punctuation. I went back inside and watched the footage from the security cams. He wasn't patrolling the street, he was sitting there facing the pool, watching it, watching me. That was the first time I felt the anger settle into something colder, not rage, resolve. If this was the game they wanted, I'd play it their way by the rules. Documented and precise. I started keeping a logbook like a case file. every page labeled with dates, times, names, and short notes. I even started pulling public payroll records and comparing the nights he parked outside with his shift schedule. Half of them didn't match. That's when I realized something important. He wasn't on duty during most of these visits. He was using his uniform to scare me off the property. That's not just unethical, it's abuse of authority. I sat there staring at the records, feeling the weight of it all. A normal person would have packed up and left by now. I almost did. I even looked at listings one night, thought about how easy it would be to just walk away. But then I stepped outside, looked at that pool glimmering under the porch light, and remembered Pops's voice saying, "You only lose what you hand over." That line pulled me back. I wasn't built to run. I was built to finish what I start. And if Karen wanted to turn this into a battle of paperwork, I'd make sure every page had her name on it. The final push came the way all her moves did, through paperwork wrapped in arrogance. A white envelope taped to my front door stamped "Urgent HOA Legal Action." Inside was a cease and desist order. According to Karen, I was to immediately stop unauthorized use of community water features. She even attached photos of my own pool as evidence. I sat at the kitchen table reading it 3 times, just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. She was claiming my private pool as community property. The signature at the bottom wasn't hers this time, it was her husband's. Officer Langford, acting as community enforcement liaison. That's not a real title. It's intimidation in letterhead form. I laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was the kind of laugh that comes when disbelief meets anger. I looked at the pool through the window, the same one my dad had built with his bare hands, the one that had stood before the HOA even existed, and something inside me hardened. I called the HOA office. Of course, no answer. I called the county clerk. They told me the HOA had filed no official complaints, just internal administrative action. Translation: fake legal threat. That's when I realized she wasn't just overstepping, she was bluffing, but a dangerous bluff, backed by a badge. That night I opened every file I had: drone footage, letters, meeting notes, photos of her husband's cruiser, timestamps from the cameras. I organized everything into folders, digital and paper. Evidence, pattern, motive. The case was writing itself. The next day she showed up unannounced. Golf cart in the driveway, engine still running. "I hope you read the notice," she said, arms crossed like she was auditioning for authority. "Failure to comply will escalate matters." I said, "Karen, you've escalated enough." She tilted her head. "Then we understand each other." I nodded once. "Perfectly." She drove off, smug and satisfied, believing she'd won, but she'd just crossed the one line you never cross with me. She made it personal. I spent the rest of the day in silence, sorting documents into one neat pile labeled HOA fraud evidence. Underneath that I slipped the letter she left me, sealed in a plastic sleeve. When you've worked in my line of work, you learn that the smallest detail is the one that breaks a case wide open. By sunset, the pool lights shimmered again, reflecting off the folder in my hands. I thought of Pops and how he used to sit here with his old thermos and say, "Some people build, others control. Builders always win in the long run." I closed the folder, took a slow breath, and said quietly to myself, "You wanted paperwork, Karen. You're about to get the federal kind." The morning after her cease and desist, I drove to the county records office. No coffee, no distractions, just determination and a flash drive in my pocket. I'd spent weeks reacting to her nonsense. It was time to go on offense. The clerk looked surprised when I asked for historic plats and environmental filings for our subdivision. Most people come in asking about fence permits or home values. I asked about water rights. She handed me a heavy binder that smelled like dust and neglect. I flipped through pages of faded maps until I saw it, our property line, inked in thick black stretching past the HOA boundary. Then near the bottom, a tiny label, Federal Watershed Protected Area, Langford Spring, my dad's name, my land. And according to that notation, the water source feeding the pool was under a federal environmental easement established decades ago. That meant no private entity, no HOA, no local board had any authority over it. Their control ended at the fence line, everything beyond was federal jurisdiction. I scanned every page, saved every map, and took photos of the original stamp. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, 1979. Pops must have filed for the permit himself. I sat there staring at that date, thinking about all the times he told me, "I built this place to last longer than the people who think they run it." He was right. By the time I left the building, I had more than proof. I had leverage. I called an old contact from my bureau days, a quiet man named Miller, now working in environmental crimes. I kept it light, told him I had a possible case of private entity interference in a federally protected watershed. He didn't ask for details, just said send what you've got. That night, I put together a folder labeled Preliminary Evidence, HOA Interference, maps, letters, drone photos, Karen's fake legal notices. I added one more file, financial records from the HOA website, including every signature from her husband. A day later, Miller called back. "This looks dirty," he said. "We'll do a surface check. No promises." I told him that was all I needed. Sometimes all you need is a whisper of authority to make corruption panic. Over the next few days, I started building quiet alliances. The HOA treasurer, Linda, had been looking worn down for months. You could tell she didn't like Karen's power games. I caught her outside one evening and asked, "Ever wonder where all the maintenance money goes?" She laughed bitterly and said, "Every day." We met in my garage after dark, lights off except for one desk lamp. She slid a stack of invoices across the workbench, pool maintenance contracts signed by companies that didn't exist anymore, fake businesses, fake repairs, real money. "That's theft," I said. "That's Tuesday," she replied. I smiled. For the first time in months, it felt like I wasn't alone. Linda wasn't the only one who'd had enough. My next ally came from 2 houses down, a quiet man named Tom Willis, retired city planner, 72, sharp as a blade. He'd spent half his life approving building permits and reviewing drainage plans for the county. When I showed him the maps I found, his eyebrows lifted. "They've been pulling water from a federal watershed?" he asked. I nodded. "And trying to fine me for it," he whistled under his breath. "That's not just illegal. That's stupid." Tom helped me cross-check everything. He pointed out where Karen's community boundary map had been doctored, extending HOA control 50 feet beyond the legal limit. She'd literally drawn new lines and filed them in neighborhood packets to make people think she had authority. Tom chuckled darkly. "This is what happens when power gets bored." We spent the evening going through every HOA document we could get our hands on. The pattern was clear: fake maintenance fees, inflated landscaping costs, and service providers that didn't exist. At least 3 checks every month were signed by Officer Langford, Karen's name on the memo, his on the approval line. Husband and wife laundering HOA money through ghost companies. I added every piece to my growing evidence wall. The files filled 2 folders, each thicker than the one before. I labeled the latest one Financial Manipulation Active Case. Old habits die hard. By then, the tension in the neighborhood had shifted. People started noticing how quiet I'd become. Karen noticed too. I stopped arguing, stopped reacting. That scared her more than confrontation ever did. A week later, flyers appeared on mailboxes with my address printed in bold. Non-compliant resident, community safety concern. Underneath was a photo of my house. No context, no evidence, just fear bait. I tore one down, crumpled it, and laughed out loud. She was slipping. The more pressure she felt, the sloppier she got. The next morning, Langford came by again, but this time he wasn't in uniform. Civilian clothes, hands in pockets, pretending to be casual. He said, "You should really back off these accusations. They make you look paranoid." I said, "I'm not accusing, I'm documenting." He stared at me for a moment, then smirked and said, "Keep filming, maybe you'll get famous." He turned to leave, but I caught something I hadn't noticed before, a gold HOA ring on his finger engraved with the initials BL, not HOA, issued. Custom. I checked the next day and learned those initials matched one of the fake maintenance companies, Blue Leaf Services. He wasn't just helping her sign checks, he was part of the shell business. I forwarded everything to Miller, the contracts, the signatures, the ring photo, the flyer. His response was short but telling. "Stay quiet, you're sitting on felony-level fraud." For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace, the kind that comes when you know the truth is finally leaning your way. But peace never lasts long in a war of power. Karen could sense something was changing, and she was about to remind me how dangerous desperate people can be. It started with a knock that didn't sound like a neighbor's, 3 short bangs, firm, impatient. When I opened the door, no one was there, just a rolled-up flyer shoved under the mat. This one was worse than the last. It said HOA violator, dangerous property owner in bold red ink. My picture again. My address again. Signed, Community Watch. Karen had weaponized shame. She wanted the neighborhood to see me as a threat, to isolate me, to turn me into an outcast before the truth could surface. I could almost admire the strategy if it weren't so pathetic. Later that night, I heard voices near the gate, a couple from 2 streets over whispering to each other. "That's him, the one with the illegal pool." I stepped outside, and they scattered like pigeons. I wasn't angry anymore, just tired of cowards hiding behind rumors. Then came the threats, handwritten notes slipped into my mailbox with no return address. Leave while you still can, sell before the fines triple, you're not wanted here, all printed on the same HOA stationery Karen used for official letters. She didn't even bother to hide it. That's the problem with people who think they're untouchable. They get lazy. I took photos of every note, sealed them in plastic, labeled them by date. My evidence binder was starting to look more like a book than a folder. 2 days later, I got an email from Miller, short, precise. We found inconsistencies in their filings. Keep collecting. That was enough to keep me moving. I decided to dig deeper into their so-called pool insurance. It was mentioned in every budget report as one of the biggest annual expenses. I searched state databases for the company name Cedar Reserve Pool Liability Coverage. Nothing. Then I looked it up in corporate record, dissolved. Closed 5 years ago. That was my third mini twist. Their entire insurance coverage was fake. Every homeowner had been paying for protection that didn't exist. Karen was charging everyone, pocketing the money and covering it with ghost paperwork. I sent the documentation to both Miller and Linda. She replied almost instantly. Oh my God, this explains everything. She's been paying herself. That same night, Karen drove by slowly in her golf cart, eyes locked on my house. I stood on the porch and waved. She didn't wave back. For the first time, I saw something behind that smug expression: fear. When power starts to slip away, it doesn't go quietly. It claws, it bites, it spreads lies to stay alive, and that's exactly what she did. She went door to door spinning stories about me being under investigation, trying to make the neighborhood turn on me. But what she didn't know was that her real investigation had already begun, and she was at the center of it. The more desperate Karen became, the louder her lies got. By the end of that week, she'd posted a statement on the HOA website, accusing me of tampering with community property. She claimed I'd damaged the pool gate and stolen water equipment. Funny thing was, she attached photos of my own backyard as evidence. It would have been laughable if it wasn't so calculated. But she wasn't fooling everyone anymore. Neighbors who once ignored me started stopping by quietly, short conversations at the mailbox, quick glances over the shoulder. One woman whispered, I know what she's doing. I've seen the Another man left a folded note in my door that simply said, stay strong, she's unraveling. That's how tyrants fall. Not with a bang, but with the slow, quiet loss of loyalty. Meanwhile, I kept tightening the net. Every night I organized files, matched signatures, highlighted inconsistencies. My evidence folder had grown into a full binder, labeled HOA Corruption, Active Case. Inside were invoices from dissolved companies, falsified inspection reports, fake insurance filings, and her husband's signatures on every check. I also documented every personal contact every time he used his badge to enforce her rules. That's where Federal Code 608 came into play. It's the law that forbids public servants from using their position for private gain. And Officer Langford had been doing exactly that, threatening residents and signing checks for a private HOA under his own authority. Miller confirmed it. He said, if this checks out, we're looking at serious charges. I asked, what happens next? He paused for a moment and said, keep doing what you're doing, make her comfortable. People like her always hang themselves when they think no one's watching. And so, I stayed quiet. I stopped reacting, stopped posting, stopped attending meetings. Silence makes predators nervous. Karen started sending more notices, petty ones, desperate ones. My grass was too long. My lights were too bright. She even filed a noise complaint when I was out of town. It didn't matter. Every letter had her husband's initials. Every signature was one more nail in her own case. One evening, I found her husband parked near the corner again, pretending to check his phone. I walked out to the end of the driveway, calm as ever. He looked up, expecting anger. Instead, I said, evening, officer. Nice night for community service. He stared at me, unsure if I meant it as a joke. I smiled and added, you might want to tell your wife to start filing real insurance paperwork. The color drained from his face. He drove off without a word. That night, I closed my binder, turned off the light, and looked out at the pool. The surface was still, perfectly reflecting the porch lamp above it. For the first time, the water didn't feel like a target. It felt like a line in the sand. They'd wanted to drown me in paperwork. Instead, I'd built a case that could bury them. Next time she sends her husband, I'll be ready. The email came on a Thursday morning. Subject line, Emergency Community Enforcement Meeting. Attendance mandatory. That was Karen's way of saying, we're about to make a scene. The notice claimed there had been continued non-compliance by a homeowner endangering neighborhood harmony. She didn't name me, but she didn't have to. Everyone knew. The meeting was set for Saturday, 7 p.m. at the clubhouse. I already knew what was coming. This was her last play, the public humiliation, the staged confrontation, the grand performance of power. But this time, she wasn't the only one recording. Miller's voice replayed in my head from the night before. "We've got enough evidence to move, we just need her to make it official." I'd agreed to wear a wire. Nothing cinematic, just a mic in my shirt pocket, synced to the bureau's van parked half a block away. "Stay calm, don't provoke," he'd said. "She'll dig her own hole." Saturday came heavy with heat. The clubhouse lights glared through the windows as I walked up the path. I could see silhouettes inside, neighbors seated, Karen standing at the front, her husband beside her like a bodyguard. His uniform wasn't regulation. No badge tonight, but the holster was still there. Always the symbol, never the substance. As soon as I walked in, the room went quiet. Karen smiled that politician's smile. "Mr. Cole," she said sweetly, "thank you for joining us. We've had quite a few complaints about your property. I'm sure we can resolve this civilly." I said nothing, just took a seat near the front, close enough to catch every word on the recorder. She launched into her speech, pacing in front of a slideshow on the wall. Photos of my pool, my gate, even my backyard security cameras. "This is what happens when one person refuses to respect community standards," she said. Murmurs rippled through the room. Her husband stepped forward, pulling an envelope from his jacket. As acting enforcement liaison, he said, "I'm here to collect the community's property, specifically the pool keys." The air in the room shifted. My heart slowed instead of racing. I could feel every eye on me waiting to see what I'd do. Karen folded her arms, chin raised in triumph. I stood, calm, deliberate. "You really want to make this official?" I said. Karen blinked. "Excuse me?" I stepped closer. "Let's make it official." Outside, I heard it before anyone saw it. The low rumble of engines turning the corner, the synchronized crunch of tires on gravel. I knew that sound. Federal vehicles. Timing perfect. The first black SUV rolled to a stop in front of the clubhouse, lights flashing soft blue through the glass. Then another, then a third. The room froze. Karen laughed nervously. "What's going on?" I turned toward her and said quietly, "You're about to find out." At first nobody moved. You could hear the hum of the ceiling fan and the faint whine of those federal engines idling outside. Karen turned to her husband, her face stiff. "Go check," she whispered. He hesitated, then squared his shoulders and stepped toward the door. The moment he opened it, blue light flooded the room. Voices followed. "Federal agents, step back from the entrance." The command wasn't loud, but it was final. You can always tell when authority walks in, the kind that doesn't need to raise its voice. Two agents entered, badges out, calm, composed. Behind them came Miller. He looked exactly how I remembered him. Gray suit, patient eyes, the kind of presence that fills a room without trying. He gave me the smallest nod before turning to Karen. "Mrs. Langford," he said evenly, "we have a federal warrant to seize HOA financial and operational records related to property fund misuse and jurisdictional fraud. Please step aside." Karen blinked fast, trying to catch up. "This is absurd. We're a homeowners association." Miller interrupted her. "Ma'am, you are under investigation for misappropriation of funds, wire fraud, and obstruction of federal property rights. You'll have a chance to explain everything, but right now you need to sit down." The room broke into murmurs. Her husband moved instinctively, hand near his holster. Instantly, two agents closed the gap between them. "Officer Langford," one said, "please remove your hand from your belt." His tone didn't waver. "You are not acting in any official capacity here." Karen turned pale. "You can't talk to him like that, he's a police officer." The agent replied flatly, "Not tonight, ma'am." Langford hesitated, then lifted his hands. They guided him to a chair near the wall. The uniform didn't help him anymore. The badge that had once scared the neighborhood now hung useless at his side. I stayed quiet, leaning against the back wall as the agents began unpacking folders, computers, and sealed envelopes. One team started photographing documents on the HOA table, another escorted the treasurer, Linda, out to give a statement. For once she looked free. Karen kept talking, voice shaking between outrage and panic. "This is a setup," she pointed at me. "He's behind this, he's been harassing us for months." Miller didn't even glance up. "Ma'am, we have your signatures on 12 falsified invoices, 3 shell companies under your address, and 1 expired insurance policy listed as active coverage. I think you've harassed yourself enough." The neighbors watched, stunned. Some whispered, some filmed. One old man in the back whispered, About time. Karen tried again, this time pleading. You don't understand. I was protecting the community. Miller cut her off gently but firmly. By stealing from it? She froze, eyes darting between me and her husband. He wouldn't look at her. His silence said everything. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just stood there, still and steady, letting the truth do the work. It was better than any revenge I could have planned. When the agents finally began reading them their rights, Karen's voice cracked. You can't do this to me. One of the agents replied, calm as stone. Ma'am, we already did. The air in the room shifted. Years of her fake power evaporated in seconds, and for the first time since this all began, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Quiet justice. Karen's voice broke completely when the agent started collecting her files. You're making a mistake, she shouted, stepping toward the table. One of the agents moved between us, hand up calmly. Ma'am, step back. She froze, trembling, her polished confidence unraveling right there under the fluorescent lights. The neighbors watched, wide-eyed, phones out, half in disbelief, half in satisfaction. I didn't say a word. There was nothing left to say. She'd built this stage herself. Every accusation, every humiliation, every rule she used to cage others. Now she was center spotlight, trapped in her own performance. Miller turned to me once the noise settled. Mr. Cole, he said evenly, thank you for your cooperation. We'll need formal statements, but you can head home once we're done here. His tone was procedural, but his eyes told me everything. It's over. I nodded once. Karen's husband stared at the floor, still in disbelief. You could see the moment it hit him. The realization that the badge he used as a weapon had become evidence. Federal Code Section 20 wasn't just a line in a book anymore. It was his reality. Using public authority for private benefit, it didn't just cost him his position, it cost him his pride. Karen tried one last time to spin control. This is harassment, she said, voice cracking. He set me up. He's the reason all of this happened. She jabbed a shaking finger in my direction. He's not even supposed to be here. Miller raised an eyebrow. He's what, ma'am? She stopped. I saw the exact moment it clicked. She'd finally put it together, the calm, the precision, the timing. Her face went pale. You're not just a homeowner, she whispered. I met her eyes for the first time that night. No, I said softly, I'm the reason they're here. Her knees gave out just enough for her to grab the back of a chair. The room went silent except for the faint hum of the recording equipment and the steady clicking of cameras documenting every inch of her downfall. Someone whispered from the back, guess she picked the wrong guy this time. A ripple of nervous laughter followed. Even Miller cracked a small smile before turning to finish the paperwork. They led Langford out first, hands behind his back. No cuffs, professional courtesy, but the message was clear. Karen followed, soon after, still talking, still trying to explain how this was all a misunderstanding, how she was only protecting community property. Her voice faded as they walked her outside, replaced by the low murmur of relief from the crowd. I stepped to the window and watched the reflection of red and blue lights flash across the pool water outside. The same pool she'd tried to take from me. The same one my dad had built by hand. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Power changes hands quietly, but justice always makes a little noise. Miller came over, his tone softer now. We'll file the reports. You'll get a copy for your records. You did good. I said, didn't do it for good. Did it for peace. He nodded. That's the best kind. The clubhouse emptied slowly after the agents left. People whispered as they passed me, half afraid to speak too loud, half needing to say something. One man I'd never even met stopped at the door and said, thank you for standing up to them. Another just nodded and walked out, relief in his eyes. It was strange how fast fear turned into gratitude once the lights changed color. When the last car pulled away, I stepped outside. The night air felt heavier, quieter, like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. The blue strobes from the federal SUVs still flashed against the wet pavement, reflecting off the pool like shattered glass. Somewhere near the clubhouse, the sprinklers kicked on, misting over the trimmed lawns that used to be battlegrounds of petty control. For the first time in months, it sounded peaceful. I walked toward the pool and stopped at the edge. The water was perfectly still, glowing faintly from the underwater lights. I could see my reflection next to the faint shimmer of the badge the agents had left behind for evidence. Karen's husband's badge, the same one he'd used to intimidate people, to enforce fake rules, to scare me into silence. Now it sat inside a clear evidence bag on the table beside me. I stared at it for a long time. It didn't look powerful anymore. It looked small. Behind me, the clubhouse door closed with a dull thud. Miller was the last to leave. We'll handle the paperwork, he said quietly. You can finally rest. I nodded, but rest felt foreign. When you've been under attack long enough, peace feels suspicious. Still, I wanted to believe it. As his car pulled away, I sat down by the pool's edge, dipped my hand into the cool water, and let it ripple across my fingers. Pops used to say water carries memory, that it remembers the hands that built it. I hoped he was right, because tonight, this water had witnessed everything: her lies, his abuse of authority, my fight to hold on to what was ours. I thought about all the neighbors who'd watched this unfold, the ones who'd stayed silent, the ones who'd finally spoken up. Maybe this place could heal now. Maybe freedom doesn't come from leaving. It comes from staying when staying costs you something. Out across the street, a window light flicked on. I could see silhouettes moving inside. Families who'd once been too scared to speak now talking again, their laughter faint but real. That sound hit harder than any victory speech ever could. The sprinklers slowed to a stop. The last blue flash from the departing convoy faded against the trees. The night returned to stillness. All that was left was the sound of crickets and the soft hum of the pool pump, a rhythm that felt like breathing again. I stood up, took one last look around, and whispered to the quiet air, "You see that, Pops? They tried to steal your water. Instead, they drowned themselves in it." The wind moved across the surface, scattering the reflection of the lights into ripples. I smiled, not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped losing. The power she once used to control others was now evidence locked in federal custody. And as I walked back toward the house, the moonlight caught the edges of the pool, the same pool she'd called community property. Now it was proof that justice still had a home here. It took 3 weeks for the dust to settle. Karen was charged with wire fraud, misappropriation of community funds, and falsifying official documents. Her husband was suspended from duty, pending federal review. They tried to downplay it on the local news, but word travels fast in small towns. Every neighbor knew what happened. Every front yard that once displayed HOA proud member signs now sat bare, like everyone was suddenly allergic to authority. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. Justice doesn't feel like fireworks, it feels like quiet air after a long storm. The HOA board resigned within days of the raid. Then at the final emergency meeting, the residents voted unanimously to dissolve the association altogether. No more community enforcement. No more water compliance. And the first clause to be struck from the bylaws was the one Karen herself had written: all water features subject to community oversight. That one hit differently. A few of the neighbors stopped by in the following weeks. They never stayed long, just enough to say thank you. One older man from the corner lot shook my hand and said, "You're the man who ended the HOA. I told him I wasn't trying to end anything, I was just trying to live. But the truth is, some fights end more than they start." The county restored my property rights in full. The fines vanished. The cease and desist letters became evidence tags in a federal case. My pool was no longer a crime scene. It was just a pool again. I hired a small crew to clean it, replace the cracked tiles, and reseal the edge stones my dad once laid. Watching the water fill back up was like watching time repair itself, slow and steady. Linda, the treasurer, came by one morning to drop off paperwork. She looked lighter. "Feels strange, doesn't it?" she said. "Peace and silence," I smiled. "We could use both." Before she left, she handed me a manila folder. Inside was a motion signed by the neighborhood council. They wanted to rename the spring that fed my pool in honor of my father, Langford Spring Preserve. I stood there holding that paper, staring at the ink. Pops would have laughed. He never cared for names or plaques. But I could almost hear him saying, "Long as it's still yours, son, that's all that matters." I built a small wooden sign by the fence that weekend. Nothing fancy, just carved letters, sealed in clear varnish. Langford Spring Preserve. Beneath it I planted a single sunflower. That was my mom's favorite. She always said sunflowers don't chase the sun, they remember where it rises. Now every morning when the light hits the water, it feels like the world's reminding me what freedom really looks like. Not loud, not showy, just steady and earned. Sometimes I catch neighbors walking by, slowing down to look through the fence. Nobody argues anymore. Nobody files complaints. The sound of kids laughing near the lake replaced the endless clicking of Karen's clipboard. It feels like the neighborhood finally remembered how to breathe. Sometimes I wonder what Karen tells herself now. Maybe she still believes she was right, that she was protecting something. People like her always rewrite their own stories to stay the hero, but the truth is simpler. She tried to control what she didn't understand: freedom. And freedom doesn't take orders. After everything ended, I kept thinking about the moment she realized it was over. The flash of confusion, the sound of those federal boots hitting the floor. It wasn't just her downfall, It was a mirror for everyone who'd ever used rules as weapons. For once, the law didn't bend toward power, it stood with the people who'd been quiet too long. The town changed after that, without the HOA breathing down everyone's necks. The place actually started to feel like a community again. Neighbors helped each other rebuild fences, repaint porches, fix driveways. Someone even organized a barbecue by the lake. No sign-ups, no forms, no approvals, just laughter, the smell of smoke and kids jumping off the dock. That's what neighborhood was supposed to mean. I'd sit on the porch most evenings, watching the light shift over the water. The pool looked new again. Clean, clear, alive. But it wasn't just the tiles or the surface that mattered. It was what it represented. Pops built it with his hands. And now it stood as proof that some things can't be owned by committees or ruled by fear. They can only be respected. One afternoon, a boy from down the road stopped at the fence. "Mister," he said, "is it true you beat the HOA?" I laughed and said, "No, son. I just reminded them who they work for." He thought about that for a second, nodded, and ran off. Simple truth, simple lesson. Every so often someone still calls me the man who ended the HOA. I don't correct them anymore. Maybe that's what I became by accident. A reminder that silence has limits, that patience isn't surrender. I didn't set out to fight anyone, I just refused to be owned. Now when I walk past that wooden sign by the pool, Langford Spring Preserve, I touch the top edge like a ritual. Pops used to say, "Son, never measure a man by what he controls, measure him by what he protects." I finally understand what he meant. Real authority doesn't come from uniforms or titles, it comes from integrity, from the quiet kind of strength that doesn't need to prove itself. Karen's badge, her fines, her rules, they all turned to dust, but the water kept flowing, the same way it always had, steady and free. It's funny how justice works. Sometimes it doesn't roar in with sirens. Sometimes it trickles back through the cracks, patient and inevitable. As the sun drops behind the trees, the pool catches the last light, scattering it across the yard like sparks. I sit there with a mug of coffee, listening to the sound of the pump hum softly, the crickets starting up again, and I realize the fight's over. The noise is gone. The peace, finally, feels earned. Maybe one day someone else will face a Karen of their own. Maybe they'll remember this story and know they're not crazy for standing their ground. Maybe they'll see that truth doesn't always need to shout, it just needs to hold. Have you ever seen someone abuse power just because they could? Drop your HOA story below and tell me where you're watching from.